Welcome to the Trust Factor Radio, bringing you interviews and insights to unlock the power of the subconscious mind to create authority, credibility, and trust. With your host, the Authority Architect and best-selling author, Neil Howe.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is your host, Neil Howe, and today my special guest is Andrew Trexler. Andrew helps individual consumers and business owners who are feeling overwhelmed with their debts or who are facing foreclosure find relief through the bankruptcy code or debt settlement. Andrew Trexler, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Neil.
Well, give me a little bit of background. Where is it that you practice and how did you get started in bankruptcy law?
Yeah, sure. So I have a small firm, just me, actually, a solo practitioner, and I practice out of Denver, Colorado. I help folks all throughout the Denver metro area and kind of up and down the Front Range and into the mountains a little bit, and just helping folks who are generally feeling overwhelmed by debt or, starting to fall behind on their mortgage or facing tax issues, and just working with them to to see what the best options for them are, considering their financial situation, and to see whether a bankruptcy might help them out in relieving some of these enormous financial and emotional strains that they're feeling. I've been practicing as a bankruptcy lawyer since 2009. Actually, started after I lost my first legal job due to the Great Recession, and started into bankruptcy law because that was certainly what was needed back in 2009, and just realized that it was a really wonderful area to be in because you could provide people with so much benefit. And so I worked for a large bankruptcy law firm for several years before going out on my own about 6 or 7 years ago now.
Well, congratulations for getting out on your own, having your own business. It's a great place to be. Although, we are under stress in different areas. I think bankruptcy is going to be probably one of the better jobs to be in because everybody's going to need your help. But tell us, is it more individuals that you deal with or businesses?
Yeah, I think I deal with individuals more often, folks who are drowning in credit card debt or have significant medical bills or just big tax issues or falling behind on their mortgage. I can often help in those situations. I do represent small business owners pretty regularly, though. People often who the business just isn't going well for them and they need to wind things up, but they're faced with, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or more in debt from a business that's gone under, or folks who are self-employed and they want to continue with their trade, but just can't manage all the personal or the business debt and need to figure out some way to get around it. So a bit of both, but more work for consumers on average.
So, these are problems that people have at the best of times, not being able to make things work and the bills and the debt piles up. But, right now, talking about the coronavirus, the COVID-19 and the impact that it's having, not only from a health perspective, but from a financial perspective as well. What do you see happening in the weeks, months, and even years ahead because of this?
Yeah. So, one thing a lot of bankruptcy lawyers believe, and I think it's borne out by the evidence, is that, unfortunately, a lot of us throughout the U.S. are really just like one disaster or one major issue away from needing to look at the bankruptcy. And God, this virus, I think, is really going to put that to the test because, obviously we've got people just out of work for weeks on end, and, businesses shutting down. And I guess my worry is a lot of these small businesses that have to shut down just, may not ever open up again. And then you've got their employees out of work. You got the owners that, just can't have broken leases or other business related debts, and then they just don't have the business anymore. So, sadly, I think there's going to be a huge uptick in bankruptcy filings, later this year after people start coming to grips with what's happening. I would say, though, fortunately, and it's probably not enough, but some of the new laws passed by Congress and some of the rules coming down right now requiring 30 and 60-day moratoriums on foreclosures or evictions, significant unemployment payments where a lot of folks might be able to get as much as they were making in their jobs, as much on unemployment as they were making in their jobs. And this stimulus payment, I mean, those are all going to be things that are going to help folks out, but I think at the end of the day, it's probably not going to be enough, especially when folks were already people who are already struggling to make ends meet and make their debt payments every month and keep on top of things. Something like this is just it's just a real shock to their financial life.
Yeah, and the people who are in the lower income brackets are the ones that are really going to be hurt, and they're the one that are doing all these service jobs and retails and factory jobs, and they're all getting laid off. They don't necessarily have the money to float for a month or two until those stimulus checks come in. Even with that, what are they going to do afterwards if it takes another 2 months to get back to normal?
Well, I mean, one thing I would encourage folks to do would be to, look into whether or not you can apply for unemployment. And most people can. I'd say in Colorado, it's a little more complicated than this, but basically if you were working, more than 4 or 5 months ago, when this started, and you've become laid off as a result, you're eligible you should be eligible for Colorado unemployment benefits. And then those are, I believe, it max out at over $500 a week. And then the CARES Act that just passed Congress this past Friday, the 27th, that's allowed for additional $600 a week payments. And I believe this can go on for at least 4 months, if not up to 6, which is longer than the 13-week general rule when it comes to unemployment. So that's something that people should definitely look into if they've recently lost their job, because take advantage of those unemployment programs. I mean, we've all paid into them, but if that's not going to get the job done, and especially when people are already dealing with like serious credit card bills or serious medical debts, then that's when it's going to be important to just to accept that good things happen to, or bad things happen to good people, and terrible things can happen that can put people in a situation where they need to look at bankruptcy and to go talk to a lawyer about just what your financial situation is and whether you may benefit from a bankruptcy. And I think most other bankruptcy attorneys do offer free consultations, so there's really no harm in looking at your situation with a competent attorney and just understanding what your rights would be.
Right. It's certainly good to know, just what is available to you. But, from a purely fiscal point of view, does the government have the money to be able to, hand out these checks to the millions of workers that are out there that are now, unemployed?
Right. Well, I mean, we've seen these initial stimulus checks, which, let's be honest, like $1,200 for an individual, or, maybe up to $3,400 for a family of 4. It may be helpful in the short term, but if people are just out of work for months on end, or if people are out of work that are not able to collect unemployment, those checks aren't gonna get it done on their own. And it's hard to say at what point our government would want to stop paying these stimulus payments and decide they don't have enough money to get it done. But I know that there's going to be plenty of people who the further we get into this are going to look at their own checkbook balances and their budget and see that they're just not going to be able to keep up with servicing their debts while also feeding their family and paying their rent or their mortgage payments.
Mm. Yeah, that exactly is the question. Just how long can they keep up with paying people? And of course, the economy has come to a standstill as well. So the GDP is going to go down. So where is all this money coming from all of a sudden?
Yeah, this is really shocking and once in a lifetime. And I dealt with kind of financial strains, I guess every day when I was helping folks through the Great Recession and just seeing this long-term unemployment and unemployment above 10%, and just all the people are falling behind on their mortgage payments as a result, or credit card payments. And I don't know. I mean, this, unfortunately, this may just dwarf that crisis when you're talking about just literally, no, 30% at less economic output in a quarter. I mean, that's just going to translate to, brutal financial realities for millions of Americans, unfortunately.
Hmm. And of course, it's not only Americans; it's global. The
Yeah.
world over is having to deal with this. So definitely be interesting to see what the next few months are like. But like you said, more and more people are going to need bankruptcy. Let's just talk about what generally gets people into trouble with their debts. What are the things that usually regardless of what's going on right now, what usually puts into people into that situation to where they get to a point to, they can't pay their bills anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think in normal times, for a lot of American workers, like the wages that they're making are, either just not enough to keep up with rising costs of living, or just barely enough. And, as a result, you see people's credit card balances just slowly increasing. But in a lot of times, normal times, I think a lot of folks who are making their minimum payments on their credit cards, they do it because, I think generally humans have a desire to pay the debts that come due. And, people want to be able to do that. And so, people often are, plugging away and doing that, but then there will be, usually it's something that happens in their life, or some combination of things that happens to them that just gets them to the point where, well, there's just no way I can keep this up. Typically it's either, a job loss, which obviously we're seeing big time right now. Divorce is very commonly a cause of bankruptcy. It's just really difficult to keep up, with payments on like two households after you've been one household managing on, checks from a husband and wife, or two spouses for a long time, and then all of a sudden you got to manage two households, or people dealing with just major medical issues, long-term illnesses, or injuries, or death in the family, and then something like that will just come along, and it just puts people in a position where they are no longer able to just keep up with making their minimum credit card payments, or keeping up with payments on some of these large medical bills that we unfortunately see too much of in this country.
Mm. So what are some of the warning signs that you're getting past that point of no return, really?
Yeah.
And need help?
Well, I tell people when they're looking at filing a bankruptcy, there's a couple of rules of thumbs. For one, you can put together a budget of what you're making per month on average, and then subtracting from that just all your regular expenses, what it's going to take to pay gas and electric, pay the rent, pay for your car, what you're spending in gas, buy groceries for everybody, take care of some miscellaneous expenses you're not expecting to come up, and look at that and see, like, is there really enough left over that I can pay these debts off in 2 or 3 years? Another way of looking at it simply would be, do you have more than about in debt than do you have more in do you have do you have more debt than a quarter of what you make in a year? So, like, if your debt is over 25% of what you gross in a year, you almost certainly want to look at a bankruptcy. But really, just anybody who's feeling like they're just struggling and or they're just not getting ahead. They're maybe making minimum payments on their credit cards, and then finding that, they just got to use it to buy gas or, pick up a week's worth of groceries. And as a result, the balance just isn't going anywhere. And, in those cases, you should certainly talk to a bankruptcy lawyer about what your options are.
And it's not just, the lower income people that file for bankruptcy. It's people from all income brackets, because generally, depending on how much you make is how much you spend. So everybody can get in trouble with this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we see here in Colorado, I mean, higher costs of living and just increased costs of living, increased housing prices over the last decade or so have led to the point where, a lot of individuals that maybe they have a good job, maybe they're making 10 grand a month, but they've got a mortgage payment that's $3,000 a month, and they've got 2 car payments, and their kids are in daycare. And so all this stuff really starts to add up. And I help folks all the time. A lot of times in bankruptcy, we'll look at this idea of the median income line, and folks who are below this, 50th percentile of Americans when it comes to their regular income. Those folks can usually file a Chapter 7 and completely wipe out most or all of their debts or something close to it. But a lot of times people who are still well above the median income, they can still really benefit from a bankruptcy. Sometimes they can still do a Chapter 7 where they don't pay anything on their debt, or they can just pay what they can afford to on their debt through a 3 to 5 year long Chapter 13 payment. And a lot of times, honestly, in my business, I see people who are required to pay what they can afford to on their debt. It's still often not more than 20, 25% or so what they actually owe, and with no interest and no late fees, and one monthly payment. It makes it much more ideal than trying to manage these debts outside of bankruptcy. So yeah, it really does span the incomes from the poorest individuals up to folks who are still making well into 6 figures.
Mm-hmm. So talk to me about Chapter 7 bankruptcy. That's the liquidation one. What are the rules and regulations for that? And then talk to some of the misinformation and myths that people have about Chapter 7 as well.
Yeah, sure. So the basic idea with the Chapter 7 is that you show by filing a budget of your income and expenses as part of your bankruptcy paperwork. You show in this budget that you really can't afford to make a substantial payment on your debt. That might be, $100 or a couple $100 a month or less. And that you also pass this means test, which I mentioned earlier, where you're either below the median income, or you can show that you have enough expenses that mean that there's really just no money left over for payment to your creditors. And so that allows you to file a Chapter 7. And then in exchange, you mentioned it's a liquidation bankruptcy. I think that gets into some of the misconceptions about bankruptcy, because it is true that when you file a Chapter 7, your property becomes part of a bankruptcy estate, and there's somebody called a trustee who represents all your creditors, who may have some rights to that property. But the reality in most Chapter 7s is that your creditors don't get paid anything in the majority of Chapter 7s in Colorado. And even in those cases where they do get some payment, a lot of times it might be from part of a tax refund that was owed to you in the year after you filed, or maybe just some small amount of the wages that were owed to you, and some small amount, maybe 20% of what's in your bank account. Those are the kind of things that we're usually dealing with when it comes to money or property being turned over in a Chapter 7. It's very rare in a Chapter 7 that someone who wants to keep their vehicle, who is current on their payments, would lose their vehicle due to the bankruptcy filing. And it's even more uncommon that someone would have to worry about losing their house if they were to file a Chapter 7. But that's one benefit. When I am talking with someone who might actually lose their house if they were to file a Chapter 7, that's one benefit of filing a Chapter 13 where you just make monthly payments and you don't ever have to worry about any of your property being turned over to pay your creditors.
So explain a little more about the Chapter 13 and, why somebody would want to file that instead of the Chapter 7.
Right. So Chapter 13 it's a 3 to 5 year repayment plan. You file your bankruptcy case, and then you file a proposed repayment plan where you say, this is what I can afford to pay on my debts over the next 3 to 5 years. And then it gets reviewed by the trustee in your case and any creditor who wants to take a look at it. And they can object to your payments if they think you can afford more, or they can approve the initial payment. And then there may be some negotiation process or just a process of fixing errors in the initial repayment plan. And then you get an approved plan, and you start making payments on that plan 30 days after you file. And then at the end of your 3 to 5 year term that once you've made all those payments, as long as you're current on your mortgage, if you're a homeowner, that you'll get a discharge, which is just legally wiping out most or all of the debts that you could not afford to pay. Why do people want to choose a 13? Usually a 13 is chosen when someone is behind on their mortgage payments, whether it's several months or they're facing foreclosure. A Chapter 13 will stop the foreclosure sale, as will a Chapter 7. But a Chapter 13 will also allow you through this repayment plan to catch up on your mortgage. And so that can be incredibly helpful for people facing foreclosure. And there are other benefits, like I mentioned, that individuals who are worried about losing something special to them, and if they were to file a Chapter 7, maybe they've got some antique or artwork or something that's been passed down that's of significant value that they don't want to part with. That's another reason you could choose a 13. More commonly, folks who are in Chapter 13 are required to do a 13, either because, like I said, their income is such that they don't pass the means test. Even after you go through all their expenses, it still shows they can afford to pay something. So Chapter 13 is the mechanism where they pay what the means test says they can afford to pay. So I mean, that's, usually sometimes people are in a 13 because they've filed bankruptcy in the more recent past, and another Chapter 7 is they're not eligible to file another Chapter 7.
So how do you determine whether bankruptcy is the best option or whether debt settlement might work?
So in almost all cases, when people are overwhelmed by debt, bankruptcy is going to be a better option than debt settlement. And so my first step is to I schedule a free consultation with the client and just explain the bankruptcy process, go through their income, the things they own, the people they owe money to, ask them several questions on recent financial transactions, and then give them my advice on which chapter is better. Debt settlement is usually reserved for cases where a person may, for instance, lose their house if they were to file a Chapter 7. Let's say somebody's got, $200,000 in equity. They got $50,000 in credit card debt. They got $200,000 in equity in their home, $50,000 in credit card debt, and they can't really afford a high Chapter 13 payment, but maybe they've got some money in retirement. They could get a family loan. In cases like that, a lot of times debt settlement can help, and I can, get deals for folks often in the range of between 40 to 60 cents on the dollar. But in reality, a bankruptcy is usually a much better deal than that, and you don't have to come up with some large chunk of money in order to just settle the debt right away.
Now, what are some of the misconceptions that you have about bankruptcy? I imagine the credit is something that comes to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I get that the most in my business is people are very concerned that a bankruptcy will wreck their credit in some unique way that other negative events like lawsuit judgments would not. So, the reality of a bankruptcy is that it is going to be a negative mark on a credit report for between 7 and 10 years. But the reality is that what a bankruptcy does to your credit report by wiping out most or all the other debts that were previously listed on there, is it improves your debt to income ratio. It just shows that you don't have all these other debts. And then if after you file a bankruptcy, you're taking steps to rebuild your credit over a few years, such as through maybe getting a new car loan or taking out like a secured credit card, a prepaid credit card, or sometimes getting some other like low dollar limit credit card, paying your student loans after you file bankruptcy. Those kind of things can all help you build your credit. And the reality is that many people who are filing bankruptcy, their credit's already pretty low. We're talking like 400 or 500s, and their credit is expected to be better even like a year after filing, as long as they're taking some steps to rebuild credit, some pretty basic steps, and not doing anything further to harm their credit, like missing payments after the bankruptcy is filed on some new debt. So yeah, really, I think the biggest misconception is that people's credit can be destroyed by a bankruptcy, when the reality is it's something that can be rebuilt from in a year or a few years, most really.
Let's talk about the student loans. A massive problem in this country. Are they covered under bankruptcy law?
Unfortunately, they are very rarely covered. You have to show in most cases that repaying the loan would impose an undue hardship on the borrower, and that can be a very difficult test to pass. And so, honestly, when it comes to folks who are possible candidates for a discharge of their student loans, I usually refer them to an attorney who specializes in student loan issues. One thing that can help folks who have large student loans is that often those debts the debts for the student loans were either all or mostly about financing that education, actually paying tuition, books, and fees. And in our district, at least, we have some very good case law that suggests that those are called non-consumer debts. And if you have a more non-consumer debts than consumer debts, then you actually don't have to pass a means test to show that you're eligible for Chapter 7. And so I've had some clients over the years that make pretty good money, that file a budget that shows that they can actually probably afford to pay something, but meet this non-consumer debt exception to the means tests. And so that's one area where, where I see that having a lot of student loans can be beneficial as you go through the bankruptcy process. But yeah, unfortunately, it's, bankruptcy is rarely a good tool for, really resolving your student loan problems.
So, Andrew, for people who are in debt, what holds them back from getting the help that they need and contacting somebody like yourself?
Yeah, well, I think for one, a lot of folks just don't really understand how a bankruptcy works, or just feel like, or they have one of these misconceptions about it wrecking their credit for a decade, or causing them to have their car taken or their home taken. And I think a lot of times that those misconceptions, or just a lack of knowledge about how a bankruptcy will actually benefit them, does keep people from looking into it. I used to say during the recession, because we saw so many cases, but I know there were so many more people who were really struggling, is that it felt to me like for every person who decided to file a bankruptcy, there were probably 2 or 3 other people out there that just don't know anything about it, or allow these misconceptions to get the best of them, to keep them from moving forward. That's part of it. And then also, I think especially a lot of Americans, we just we want to pay our debts, and these are like, we signed promises to pay, and we want to be able to do it. And so I feel like a lot of my job when I'm talking to somebody who I can tell is hesitant is to get them to understand that filing bankruptcy doesn't make you a bad person. It's just generally the needed result of a lot of bad things happening to a decent person. And the key is to just being able to accept that, not beating yourself up too much about it, and just deciding, this is going to be the best financially for me and my family, and, allow me to keep my home, allow me to continue saving for retirement. So I'm not just dumping all this money towards debt payments for years and years on end.
Yeah, you got to look at the bigger picture there instead of just, I got myself into this mess, I need to get myself out of it. There's more to it than that.
Right. Yeah. And the reality is, if you are, a person with a decent salary, maybe making 60, 70,000 a year, and you have $50,000 in credit card debt, you're not paying that off on your own anytime soon. And you're going to pay maybe as much in interest as you owe on the principal balance. And during that entire time, probably just living a less fulfilling life where all your money is just devoted to the bare essentials and to servicing debt. And, that's just no reason to live that's just no way to live your life for years on end. And so it's important for me to try to convey that to people who are, on the fence about whether or not to move forward.
Yeah, well, the bankruptcy code is there. Unfortunately, most lay people do not know what that bankruptcy code is. And that's why you have to get that education by speaking to somebody like yourself, Andrew, who knows it inside and out, knows the best avenue to take, will be able to advise what best to do. If somebody is listening to this and wants to reach out to you, Andrew, what is the best way for them to do that?
They can visit our website. That's trexlerlegal.com, TREXLERLEGAL.com. Or you can give our office a call, 303-228-2257, and be happy to talk more. And if it seems to make sense, to schedule a free consult and see how we can help you out.
Great stuff. And again, you're in the Denver metro area?
Yeah, I'm in the Denver Tech Center, so it's kind of on the south side of the city of Denver.
Okay. Well, great stuff, Andrew. I really appreciate it. Final message from you for people who are out there, that are already seeing themselves in financial stress. What's the last piece of advice that you would give them?
Yeah, if you are stressed of debt before you start pulling out money from your retirement account to pay these debts, or start falling behind on your mortgage, give me or give another bankruptcy attorney a call, and so we can understand your situation, and so you can understand how these laws might be there to protect you. You said you mentioned a lot of folks don't understand how bankruptcy works, and honestly, when I got into it, I didn't understand either. It took me a couple months to really get up to speed on just what an enormous relief it is. And I was honestly just blown away by how much of a benefit this can be for folks who are in need, and how the consequences are rarely as damaging as people might think.
Yeah, there's definitely a perception about it. There's going to be a lot of emotions about it as well. But ultimately, you need to reach out to a professional to ask questions. So I appreciate you being on here, Andrew Trexler, with me today, and spending some time on Trust Factor Radio. And hopefully that information helps. But Andrew, thanks very much for being a guest.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Neil. Good talking with you.
And to our listening audience, if you like what you hear, hit that like button and share, and we will see you next time on the show.
You've been listening to the Trust Factor Radio with Neil Howe. To learn about the resources mentioned in the show and to listen to past episodes, go to thetrustfactorradio.com. To get a copy of the book, The Trust Factor, go to thetrustfactorbook.com. If you are ready to act now and build your authority, credibility, and trust, schedule a consultation with Neil at theauthorityarchitect.com.